The air of the dense, dark forest cut like blades, and every dry leaf under the ruthless executive's feet sounded like a judgment. He saw his mother, weakened by fever and shivering with cold, not as a human being, but as an obstacle, a burden preventing the sale of valuable land. With calculating coldness, he dragged her into the heart of the woods, where light barely dared to penetrate. There, by a centuries-old oak, he hung her with rough ropes, tying her firmly to the trunk. "Nature will take care of it," he murmured, the phrase echoing in the emptiness of his soul, while the elderly woman, disoriented and fragile as paper, could barely keep her eyes open. He left her there at the mercy of fate, hunger, cold, and solitude. But what he didn't know was that nature had its own guardians. Hours later, an enormous Bengal tiger, with eyes like embers in the gloom, emerged from the shadows. It was not a hungry predator, but an ancestral force that recognized fragility. With a low roar, almost a lament, it approached the defenseless figure. With the precision of its claws, the tiger cut the ropes that bound the woman to the oak. Then, with surprising delicacy for a beast of its size, it held her, nestling her against its warm body, offering the warmth and protection her own son had denied. The forest, once a scene of abandonment, transformed into a sanctuary under the silent guardianship of the beast. The warmth emanating from the massive, striped body was not the warmth of a home, nor a son's embrace. It was the primal heat of the wild, a paradox of comfort and danger that the elderly woman's feverish mind could barely process. Her eyes, cloudy and heavy, slowly opened, registering first the dense darkness of the forest, then the orange and black fur that enveloped her. A low roar, almost a purr, vibrated through her body, but there was no threat in it, only a rhythmic cadence that seemed to calm the tremor in her bones. She was nestled against the flank of a beast, a creature that, by all laws of nature, should have been her executioner, but which revealed itself as her guardian. The memory of the rough ropes, the biting cold, her son's icy voice, was still an open wound in her soul. He had abandoned her, a disposable burden for the forest to do the dirty work, but the forest in its ancestral wisdom had sent one of its most powerful children to defy human cruelty. The Bengal tiger, with its amber eyes fixed on the surrounding darkness, was not just an animal. It was a specter of justice itself, a silent guardian who had intercepted the fate the ruthless executive had planned. Far away, in the opulence of his mansion, the son slept a dreamless sleep, lulled by the certainty that the problem had been solved. His calculating mind was already charting the next steps for the land sale, free from the nuisance of a sick mother and her insistence on preserving family roots. He felt no remorse, only the cold satisfaction of a successful deal. The forest, to him, was just a piece of land to be exploited, a resource to be monetized. He would never imagine that in its wild heart, the forest harbored a deeper morality than any human law. Meanwhile, the elderly woman, still weak and disoriented, began to feel life slowly return to her limbs. The tiger's warmth was a balm against the penetrating cold of the night. She could smell the animal's strong, wild scent, the rhythm of its deep breathing. There was no fear, only a strange acceptance, a resignation bordering on gratitude. What was this creature? A guardian angel in disguise? A feverish delusion? Reality was tenuous, but the comfort was undeniable. The tiger in turn remained vigilant. Its keen senses swept the forest, detecting the slightest movement, the most subtle scent. It was not a pet, nor a conscious savior. There was something in that woman's fragility, in the injustice of her situation, that had awakened an instinct deeper than mere hunting. It was a connection to vulnerability, a response to an imbalance in the natural order. It protected her not out of love, but out of an ancestral imperative that resonated in its wild blood. The night advanced, and with it, The cold intensified. The wind whistled through the trees, and the sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the snapping of branches, seemed like whispers from a world oblivious to her personal tragedy. But within the tiger's furry embrace, the elderly woman found an unlikely refuge. Each beat of the animal's heart was a promise of life, a stark contrast to the death sentence her own son had pronounced. The fever, little by little, seemed to subside under the constant warmth. The woman's mind, previously clouded, began to clear, bringing with it full awareness of her situation. She was in the arms of a tiger that had saved her. The irony was cruel, but the reality was a miracle. She raised a trembling hand, hesitantly, and touched the animal's soft, rough fur. The tiger did not move, only tilted its head slightly, its eyes fixed on hers for an instant before returning to its vigilance. In that gaze, the woman saw not ferocity, but an incomprehensible depth, a silent recognition. The tension, however, did not diminish. The forest was a place of wild beauty, but also of hidden dangers. Other predators could be attracted by the scent or simply by the unusual presence, and her son. Had he truly abandoned her forever? The possibility of his return, of his cruelty manifesting again, was a shadow that hung over the improvised sanctuary. The tiger could protect her from nature, but could it protect her from human malice? The answer was uncertain, but for now, in the quiet of that night under the guard of a beast, the woman found a peace she never expected. A fragile peace, yes, but at that moment it was all she had. The sun would begin to rise in a few hours, and with it, the uncertainty of a new day. The pale light of dawn began to filter through the dense canopies, painting the forest with shades of grey and moss green. The air, once biting, softened slightly, but the pre-dawn chill still clung to her skin. The forest awakened with a chorus of sounds, the distant chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the murmur of an invisible stream. For the elderly woman, nestled against the tiger's primal warmth, each sound was a note in a symphony of wildlife, a constant reminder of her precarious existence. The fever had receded further, leaving behind a painful but undeniable clarity. Reality imposed itself with the force of a blow. She was alive, saved by a beast, abandoned by her own blood. The image of her son's cold face, the indifference in his eyes, was a deeper scar than any rope could leave. He had condemned her, and nature, in a cruel and beautiful paradox, had rescued her. Gratitude mingled with bitterness. Momentary safety did not erase the fragility of her condition. The tiger, a monument of strength and vigilance, remained motionless. Its amber eyes, now more visible in the dim light, swept the forest with silent intensity, patrolling the limits of the improvised sanctuary. Every fiber of its being seemed to warn of invisible dangers. The woman, in turn, felt her throat scratch, her mouth dry, her stomach empty. The tiger's warmth was a balm, but it did not fulfill the basic needs of a debilitated human body. Her mind, now more lucid, began to register the urgency of her own survival. Far away, in the opulence of his mansion, the ruthless executive awoke in his soft bed, bathed in the golden light filtering through silk curtains. No nightmare, no shadow of remorse stained his sleep. His mind was already focused on the day's business, on the crucial meeting that would seal the land sale. The problem had been solved. The forest, in his view, was now an empty space, ready to be filled with concrete and profit. He had no idea that in its wild heart the forest held a secret, a miracle of compassion that defied all his cold, calculating logic. The woman tried to move, a faint moan escaping her dry lips. The tiger tilted its head, a low, questioning rumble vibrating in its chest. It was not a threat, but an inquiry. She raised a trembling hand, pointing to her mouth, to her throat, a desperate gesture for water. The tiger watched her, its deep eyes seeming to weigh the situation. There was an intelligence there, a comprehension that transcended pure instinct. Slowly, with a delicacy that belied its colossal size, the tiger moved, rising with fluid grace. The woman felt the warmth recede, and a chill of anxiety ran through her. Would it leave her? Abandon her now, as her son had done? But the tiger did not move away. Instead, it turned, its eyes fixed on hers, and began to walk slowly, looking back as if inviting her to follow. With each step, it seemed to gauge her ability to keep up. The woman, with a monumental effort, tried to stand. Her muscles were stiff, her legs weak, but thirst was a more powerful driving force than fear. She staggered, almost falling, but the tiger stopped, waiting, its presence a silent promise of support. It was a tacit pact, a trust forged in adversity. She did not know where it was leading her, but she knew her only hope lay in following it. The forest, now more illuminated, revealed its dangers and its wonders. Twisted roots, fallen branches, the damp scent of earth and decaying leaves. Every step was a battle, every sound an alert. The tiger ahead moved with silent agility, its muscles rippling under its striped fur. It was not a human guide, but a wild beacon navigating a terrain that was its home. The woman, her mind still battling the weakness of her body, felt the urgency of finding water, of quenching the thirst that consumed her. But the tension remained, an invisible thread connecting her to imminent danger. Her son, in his arrogance, could send someone. Other predators could be lurking. The forest was a sanctuary, yes, but a sanctuary with its own laws and its own challenges. And she, a fragile intruder, depended entirely on the benevolence of a beast to survive. The tiger stopped by a small stream, hidden among moss-covered rocks and dense foliage. The water, clear and fresh, flowed gently, a sound that was music to the woman's ears. She knelt with difficulty, her hands trembling, and brought the water to her lips, feeling life return with each sip. The tiger watched, its eyes vigilant, ensuring no danger approached. In that moment, the boundary between human and wild dissolved. There was no longer predator and prey, only a bond of protection and vulnerability. But the forest, in its immensity, held secrets yet untold, and the woman's fate was still far from sealed. With each sip, each breath, the certainty that life was a precious gift grew stronger, a gift her son had tried to steal, but which nature, in its wisdom, had returned. The cold, pure water flowed down the woman's parched throat, a balm that soothed the burning and brought an almost euphoric relief. Each sip was a breath of life, a small miracle her body eagerly absorbed. But as her thirst diminished, other sensations imposed themselves with brutal clarity. The excruciating hunger that twisted her stomach, the cold that still clung to her bones, and the searing pain in her wrists and ankles, marks of her own son's cruelty. Her gratitude to the tiger was immense, but the reality of her situation was a burden too heavy to ignore. The tiger, a silent and imposing presence, did not move. Its amber eyes, now more vivid in the growing light of dawn, remained fixed on the surrounding forest, a vigilant sentinel against invisible threats. It seemed to understand that while water was essential, it was not the complete solution for the fragility of that human creature. There was an ancestral wisdom in its behavior, a comprehension of the laws of survival that transcended mere predation. The woman tried to stand completely, but her legs trembled, and she fell to her knees again, a moan of frustration escaping her lips. The tiger turned its head slightly, a low, guttural sound vibrating in its chest. It was not a warning growl, but something closer to a murmur, a subtle communication that she, in her vulnerability, seemed to understand. It approached, and the woman, without hesitation, leaned against its warm, muscular flank, seeking the warmth and stability her exhausted body so craved. Far away, reality was different. In the air-conditioned meeting room of a glass and steel skyscraper, the ruthless executive smiled. The deal was sealed. The sale of the forest land, that piece of unproductive land his mother stubbornly insisted on protecting, had been successfully finalized. The figures were astronomical, and the satisfaction on his face was palpable. He shook the buyer's hand firmly, his eyes gleaming with the cold light of triumph. No shadow of doubt or remorse stained his conscience. To him, the problem had been eradicated, the inheritance transformed into capital, and the future, free from any emotional ties, seemed bright and profitable. The forest in his mind no longer existed, replaced by development projects and promises of profit. Back in the forest, the woman felt the contrast viscerally. With each beat of the tiger's heart, with each breeze that whispered through the leaves, she felt the wild life pulsating around her. The animal's warmth was a shield against the pre-dawn cold, but hunger was a constant ache, a cruel reminder of her condition. She closed her eyes, trying to gather strength. The image of her son, so vivid in her mind, was a bitter poison. How could he? How could ambition so corrode someone's soul as to commit such an atrocity? The tiger, as if sensing the turmoil within her, moved again. With a smooth, calculated movement, it gently nudged her into a small indentation between rocks, covered by dense foliage, a natural shelter that offered some protection from the wind. There, it lay down again, forming a protective barrier with its body, its eyes sweeping the entrance to the small refuge. It was a gesture of care, a provision of security the woman would never expect from a beast, much less from her own son. The tension, however, did not diminish. The forest was a complex ecosystem, and the presence of a tiger, even a protective one, did not guarantee immunity from all dangers. The scent of blood from the woman's wounds, though faint, could attract other predators. Her son, in his arrogance, could send someone to confirm her absence, or simply to scout the land. With every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch, the woman felt a shiver of apprehension. She was alive, yes, but her survival was a tenuous thread, dependent on the vigilance of a beast and the luck of not being discovered. The sun climbed higher, filtering in golden beams through the treetops, illuminating the improvised sanctuary. The woman watched the tiger, its striped fur gleaming in the light, its muscles tense and ready. There was no fear in her eyes, only a deep admiration and a gratitude that transcended words. She raised her hand again, this time more firmly, and stroked the animal's head, feeling the rough yet soft texture of its fur. The tiger did not pull away. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, its eyes meeting hers in a moment of silent recognition. In that gaze, the woman saw not just wild strength, but a soul, an unexpected guardian who challenged all her conceptions of life and death, of humanity and nature. The forest, which should have been her tomb, had become her refuge, and the beast, her potential executioner, her savior. But the day was still young, and the challenges of survival, as well as the shadows of the past, still loomed over her. The golden light of the morning sun, which had once seemed a balm, now cruelly revealed the extent of her weakness. The water had quenched her thirst, but hunger, a silent and relentless beast, gnawed at her insides. Each beat of the tiger's heart, pulsing warm and strong against her exhausted body, was a reminder of the life that refused to abandon her, but also of the fragility of her existence. Her wrists and ankles throbbed, a constant echo of her own blood's brutality. How could a son, conceived and loved, inflict such pain? The image of the ruthless executive, with his cold smile and calculating eyes, haunted her thoughts. He, by now, would be toasting his triumph in a luxurious office, oblivious to the dust, the scent of damp earth, and the distant roar of the wildlife she now breathed. To him, the forest was a mere obstacle, land to be cleared, a problem to be solved. To her, it had become an unlikely sanctuary, and the beast that should have been her executioner, her guardian. The irony was a poison that mingled with hunger and pain. The tiger, as if reading the turmoil in her soul, moved. It was not an abrupt movement, but a fluid transition, its muscles rippling under its striped fur. It stood, its amber eyes fixed on hers, and then, with a low, questioning growl, began to walk slowly out of the rocky indentation. It was an invitation, a silent command. The woman hesitated for an instant, the fear of the unknown battling the urgency of hunger. But the trust, forged in a silent pact, was stronger. With a monumental effort, she dragged herself out of the improvised shelter. Every muscle protested, every joint creaked, but the promise of relief, however tenuous, propelled her. The tiger waited, its majestic bearing an anchor amidst the vastness of the forest. It did not rush her, but its presence was a constant reminder that time was a luxury she did not possess. The forest, now fully illuminated by the morning sun, revealed a tapestry of colors and sounds. The chirping of birds, the buzzing of insects, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, all were a wild concert, a symphony of life she had forgotten in her urban, protected existence. The tiger guided her through the dense vegetation, its steps almost inaudible. It seemed to know every root, every stone, every shadow. The woman, stumbling behind it, felt like an awkward intruder in a world that was not her own. But at the same time, she felt a growing connection to that land, a primordial bond her son had tried to sever. With each step, the pain in her bare feet was a reminder of her vulnerability, but also of her resilience. She would not die there, not now, not after everything. They reached a clearing where bushes laden with small red berries gleamed under the sun. The tiger stopped, its eyes indicating the direction. They were wild berries, succulent and inviting. The woman knelt, her trembling hands reaching for the fruit. The bittersweet taste exploded in her mouth, a delight she never imagined finding. It was not a feast, but it was enough to quell the sharpest hunger, to infuse a little energy into her exhausted body. The tiger watched, its posture relaxed, but its eyes still vigilant. As she ate, the woman's mind wandered. She remembered her son when he was small, how she had taught him to distinguish edible from poisonous fruits during rare visits to her grandmother's country house. The memory was a blow, a brutal contrast between the innocent boy and the cruel man he had become. How had ambition and power turned his heart to stone? She felt a wave of deep sadness, but also a cold, growing anger. It was not just the anger of a victim, but the anger of a betrayed mother, of a woman who refused to be erased. Far away in his office overlooking the city, the ruthless executive reviewed the numbers. The profit from the sale of the forest land was even greater than expected. He smiled, a smile of pure satisfaction. The problem was solved, and the path to his empire was clear. He did not think of the forest, nor of the woman he had left behind. His mind was already on new projects, new acquisitions, new ways to expand his power. Nature, to him, was just a resource to be exploited, and emotions, a weakness to be overcome. Back in the forest, the woman finished eating the berries, feeling a slight improvement. The tiger by her side lay down, its head resting on its paws, but its eyes continued to scan the surroundings. She knew the forest was a place of beauty, but also of danger. The sweet scent of the berries, the trace of her own dried blood, could attract other creatures. And the shadow of her son, however distant, still loomed. He could send someone, a henchman, to make sure his work had been completed. The woman leaned, resting her head on the tiger's warm flank. The texture of its fur was rough, but the warmth emanating from it was invaluable comfort. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a brief moment of rest. a luxury she didn't know when she would have again. In that unlikely embrace between the beast and the woman, the forest seemed to breathe in unison. It was a promise of life, a declaration that, despite human cruelty, nature would always find a way to resist, to protect, to heal. But night was approaching, and with it new challenges and the darkness that brought not only the cold, but also the deepest fears. The tiger, its silent guardian, remained vigilant, a sentinel against the world, both wild and civilized. The battle for survival was far from over. The promise of life, whispered by the morning sun, now faded with twilight. The air, once warm and inviting, began to bite, bringing with it the damp chill of the night forest. Shadows lengthened, swallowing the vibrant colors of the day and transforming the familiar into something mysterious and threatening. Every rustling leaf, every twig snapping under the invisible weight of some creature, was a reminder of the vastness and indifference of that world. The woman, nestled against the tiger's warm flank, felt the cold penetrate her bones. The berries had quelled the sharpest hunger, but energy was a scarce resource, and her body, exhausted and wounded, yearned for a rest that seemed impossible. Her wrists and ankles throbbed with a dull ache, a constant echo of the brutality that had brought her to that place. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the animal's warmth, on the rhythmic beat of its heart, which was the only constant and comforting sound in that chorus of dangers. The tiger, its silent guardian, seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. Its muscles tensed under its fur, its amber eyes sweeping the growing darkness with an intensity the woman had never seen. It was not just a shield against the cold, but a sentinel against the dangers the night brought. The scent of her own blood, though dry and faint, still lingered in the air, an olfactory signature that could attract more opportunistic and less noble predators than the great feline beside her. The forest was a hunting ground, and she a wounded prey. An owl hooted in the distance, the sharp, melancholic sound cutting through the silence. Soon after, the distant howl of a coyote, or perhaps a wolf, made the hairs on the woman's neck stand on end. The tiger growled low, a guttural sound that vibrated through her body, a warning, a declaration of possession and protection. There was no doubt it was protecting her, but from how many dangers could a single tiger protect her? The woman's mind, despite her exhaustion, was in a whirlwind. The image of her son, the ruthless executive, appeared and faded, mingling with the shadows of the forest. She saw him in his luxurious office, toasting his success, oblivious to the darkness and cold that enveloped her. To him, she was a removed obstacle, a discarded piece in his power game. To her, he was a ghost, an open wound that hurt more than any physical injury. How could ambition blind a heart so much? How could a son become such a calculating monster? The anger, once cold, now began to burn, a slow, persistent fire in her chest. It was not just the anger of a victim, but the anger of a betrayed mother, of a woman who refused to be erased. She had survived his cruelty, and with each beat of the tiger's heart, with each breath she took, it was a small victory against the darkness he had tried to impose. Suddenly, a closer, heavier rustle. The tiger moved, its eyes fixed on a spot in the darkness. The woman felt the animal's body stiffen, the tension palpable. She held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Was it an animal? Or worse, was it someone sent by him? Paranoia was a shadow joining the others. The forest, which had once been her sanctuary, now seemed a labyrinth of threats. The tiger rose slowly, its steps silent, almost supernatural. It positioned itself at the entrance of the small rocky indentation, its massive body an impenetrable barrier. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the faint starlight that began to emerge. The woman, huddled at the back of the shelter, watched it, a mixture of terror and admiration. It was the very embodiment of wild strength, a predator at the top of the food chain, and yet her protector. The sound ceased. The forest fell silent for an instant, a heavy, expectant silence. Then a low, distant growl, not from the tiger but from another creature. The tiger did not relax, but the immediate danger seemed to have receded. It remained vigilant for a few more minutes, before lying down again, but this time, with its head raised, its eyes still sweeping the darkness. The woman exhaled, releasing air she hadn't realized she was holding. The relief was almost as exhausting as the fear. She leaned her head on the tiger's shoulder, feeling the contained strength in its body. It was her guardian, her shield, her only hope. With each challenge overcome, each threat repelled, the flame of hope in her chest burned a little stronger. She had survived her son's cruelty, survived the forest, and now a pack of wolves. Far away in the lit city, the ruthless executive received a call. "Sir, the reconnaissance drone detected nothing unusual in the area. The land is clear." He smiled, a cold, satisfied smile. "Excellent. Proceed with the deforestation plan. I want no delays." He hung up, oblivious to the irony of his words, to the life pulsating in the forest he condemned, and to the woman who, against all odds, resisted. Back in the forest, the woman felt the night's cold intensify. The pain in her wounds was constant, but the tiger's presence was a balm for her soul. She knew the night would be long, and that with each passing hour, new challenges would arise. The forest was a place of beauty and brutality, of life and death, and she, at the center of it all, was learning to survive, one day, one night at a time, with the help of her improbable savior. Sleep, if it came, would be light and restless, but hope, however tenuous, still burned in her chest. The battle for survival was far from over, and the darkness of the night was just the beginning of a new test of her resilience. The night advanced, dragging with it a mantle of damp cold that seemed to infiltrate the woman's very soul. Each breath was a small effort, the icy air burning her already fragile lungs. Her teeth chattered softly, an irregular rhythm that echoed the beat of her exhausted heart. The wounds on her wrists and ankles, though cleaned by the tiger, now throbbed with a dull, constant ache, amplified by the cold that numbed her limbs. She huddled even closer against the great feline's flank, seeking the warmth radiating from its massive body, a warmth that was the only barrier between her and imminent hypothermia. The tiger, a mass of muscle and fur, was a living furnace. Its eyes, once amber, now glowed like embers in the almost total darkness, sweeping the forest with unwavering attention. It did not seem to feel the cold in the same way she did, its wild nature more adapted to the rigors of the night. But the woman perceived the tension in its muscles, the slight tremor in its tail, indicating that, even for it, the night brought its own challenges. The forest's silence was not a silence of peace, but of expectation, punctuated by sounds that, to human ears, were indistinguishable, but to the tiger, were clear messages of a world in constant motion. The woman's mind, despite extreme exhaustion, refused to yield to sleep. Each time her eyes closed, the image of her son's face, distorted by ambition and cruelty, appeared in her mind. She saw him, not as the monster who had abandoned her, but as the boy she had loved, the son she had protected with her own life. The memory was a torture, a painful reminder of how innocence could be corrupted, of how love could be betrayed. But along with the pain, a new emotion began to solidify, an iron determination. She would not die there. She would not be erased. She would not give him the satisfaction of her defeat. A more intense rustle, this time not so distant, broke the monotony of the vigilant silence. It was not the sound of a small rodent, nor the rustling of the wind. It was something larger, heavier, moving with a caution that indicated a predator. The tiger, which seemed to be in a state of alert rest, instantly raised its head, its eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. A low, almost inaudible growl vibrated in its chest, a silent warning that the woman felt more than heard. She held her breath, her heart beating erratically against her ribs. The icy air seemed to solidify in her lungs. What could it be? A wolf? A bear? The forest was vast and full of creatures, and she was an easy target, wounded and weak. The tiger rose, its movements fluid and silent, a massive shadow in the darkness. It positioned itself slightly ahead of her, its body an imposing barrier, its muscles tense and ready for action. The woman saw the gleam of its canine teeth, sharp and deadly, a promise of defense. The sound approached, and then a scent. A strong, wild scent, but different from the tiger's musky odor. It was the scent of a pack, of multiple bodies, wolves. She had read about them, about their intelligence and their group hunting. A single tiger could ward off one wolf, perhaps two, but an entire pack? Doubt tormented her, but her trust in the tiger was a thin thread she clung to. The tiger let out a low, deep roar that reverberated through the forest, a sound not of attack, but of warning, of dominance. The roar was answered by a distant howl, but one that seemed to carry a note of hesitation. The pack was there watching, assessing. The tiger did not move, maintaining its defensive posture, its eyes fixed on the darkness from which the sounds came. The woman felt a shiver run down her spine. She was the prize, the wounded prey that had attracted the wolves. Minutes dragged on, seeming like hours. Silence returned, but it was a different silence, charged with palpable tension. The wolves had not attacked. The tiger's roar, its imposing presence, had been enough to deter them, at least for now. The tiger remained in its position for a while longer, before lying down again, but this time with its head raised, its eyes still sweeping the darkness. It would not completely relax, not as long as there was the slightest threat. The woman exhaled, releasing air she hadn't realized she was holding. The relief was almost as exhausting as the fear. She leaned her head on the tiger's shoulder, feeling the contained strength in its body. It was her guardian, her shield, her only hope. With each challenge overcome, each threat repelled, the flame of hope in her chest burned a little stronger. She had survived her son's cruelty, survived the forest, and now a pack of wolves. Far away, in the city, the ruthless executive slept in his luxurious bed, oblivious to the dangers of the forest he had condemned. His dreams were of empire, of power, of growing numbers. He did not care about the lives he crushed in his path, nor the nature he destroyed. To him, the forest was merely an obstacle to be removed, and his mother, an inconvenient memory. But in the forest, the woman and the tiger were one, an unlikely alliance against the darkness of the night and the cruelty of the world. The night was still long, and the cold continued to bite, but the woman felt a new strength growing within her. A strength not just to survive, but to resist, to fight. The battle for survival was far from over, and the darkness of the night was just the beginning of a new test of her resilience, and perhaps of her revenge. Dawn would bring not only light, but the promise of a new day to fight. The darkness, which seemed eternal, began to yield. Not suddenly, but in a slow, gradual ballet of grey and bluish tones that filtered through the treetops. The cold, however, persisted, a damp shroud clinging to her skin and bones. The woman, still nestled against the tiger's warmth, felt the icy air on her face, but the sight of the first light of dawn brought an almost painful relief. It was a new day. She had survived the night, the wolf pack, her own fragility. The tiger, which had not fully relaxed, raised its head, its amber eyes sweeping the horizon that began to define itself. It let out a silent yawn, revealing an impressive row of teeth, But there was no threat in its gesture, only the routine of a waking predator. Its muscles stretched under its striped fur, a display of contained strength. The woman watched it, a silent admiration growing in her chest. It was the very personification of the forest's resilience, and she, in some way, was linked to it. The pain in her wrists and ankles was a constant companion, a cruel reminder of her son's betrayal. Hunger and thirst began to manifest with more intensity now that the night's adrenaline subsided. She tried to move, but every joint protested, every muscle ached. The tiger noticed her discomfort. It rose slowly without haste and looked at her with an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. Then, with a gentle movement of its head, it indicated the exit from the rocky indentation. She understood. She needed to move, find water, perhaps something to eat. With a monumental effort, she dragged herself out of the shelter, feeling the icy morning air on her skin. The forest, in the dim light of dawn, revealed itself in shades of green and brown, with dew glistening on the leaves. The tiger walked ahead of her, its steps silent, its senses keen. It was not just her protector, but now her guide. They moved slowly, the woman leaning on trees and rocks, each step a victory. The tiger led her along a path that seemed familiar to it, a tangle of dense vegetation that offered cover. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small stream, its crystal-clear waters murmuring softly over the stones. The woman fell to her knees, barely containing a groan of relief. She drank the cold, pure water, feeling life slowly return to her veins. It was the most delicious water she had ever tasted. As she drank, a distant and disturbing sound reached her ears. It was not the sound of the forest, nor the roar of an animal. It was a metallic, heavy sound that seemed to tear the fabric of the morning silence. The tiger stiffened, its ears swiveling in the direction of the sound. A low, guttural growl vibrated in its chest, a sound of alert, of anger. The woman felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that sound. It was the sound of machines. The sound intensified, accompanied by a distant crash, like that of a falling tree. It was unmistakable. Deforestation. Her son's plan. He had not given up. He was coming for the forest, for her sanctuary, for her last refuge. Anger, cold and sharp, began to bubble within her, overcoming fear and exhaustion. He had not only abandoned her to die, but now he was destroying the only place that had welcomed her. The tiger, sensing the change in her state of mind, looked at her. There was an understanding in its eyes, a connection that transcended the barrier of species. It also felt the threat, the invasion. The forest was its home, and it was being attacked. The sound of the machines approached, louder, more insistent. The ruthless executive, far away in his office overlooking the city, reviewed the progress reports. "Excellent," he told his assistant, without looking away from the screen. "We're moving faster than anticipated. I want the area cleared in a week. No traces." He smiled, a predator's smile, oblivious to the devastation his words caused, to the life he crushed. In the forest, the woman stood, the pain in her body almost forgotten in the face of the fury that consumed her. She was no longer just a victim. She was a survivor, and now a defender. The tiger by her side seemed to share her determination. Together, they were an unlikely force, an alliance against human cruelty and destruction. They needed to move, and fast. The sound of the machines was a warning, a premonition that danger lay not just in the night, in wild predators, but in the very civilization that had rejected her. The battle for survival had transformed into a battle for the forest's existence and for her own dignity. The woman looked at the tiger, and it at her. In its eyes, she saw not just savagery, but a promise to fight, a promise that they would not surrender. Dawn had brought not only light, but the clarity of a new purpose. Revenge, once a distant thought, was now a burning fire in her chest, fueled by the distant smoke of falling trees. The sound of the machines was a physical blow, a hammer striking the forest's soul and the woman's heart. It was not just noise, it was the voice of destruction, the echo of her son's greed, materializing in every crash that reverberated through the trees. The smoke, once just a distant smudge on her mind's horizon, now began to mingle with the fresh morning air, a pungent smell of diesel and burning wood that suffocated the fragrance of damp earth and leaves. The tiger by her side no longer growled. Its body was tense, every muscle vibrating with contained fury, its eyes fixed in the direction from which the horror approached. It was the forest itself, and the forest was being wounded. The woman felt the ground tremble slightly beneath her feet, a tremor that did not come from the earth, but from the brutality of the heavy machines forging their path. She closed her eyes for an instant, and the image of her son's cold face, the same face that had condemned her, superimposed itself on the sight of falling trees. Revenge, once a distant whisper, now screamed in her chest. It was no longer just about surviving his cruelty. It was about protecting what he was destroying, the only place that had offered her refuge, the only being that had shown her compassion. She opened her eyes, and the tiger watched her. There was no fear in its amber eyes, only a wild determination that mirrored her own. It was a silent exchange, a mutual promise. They were one, an alliance forged in pain and imminent threat. She was no longer the defenseless mother, nor was it just a predator. They were guardians, the last defenders of a sanctuary being desecrated. The sound of a gigantic tree falling, a final lament that echoed through the forest, sent birds flying in panic, their alarm calls piercing the air. The woman felt a pang of pain for every leaf, every branch, every life that was crushed. It was her life being crushed again, but this time she would not bend. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse but firm. "We won't let it happen." The tiger responded with a nod, as if understanding every word, every intention. It turned, not to flee, but to move towards the danger, its step silent and calculated. The woman followed, the pain in her limbs a constant reminder, but now it was fuel, not an impediment. Every step was a declaration of resistance. They moved through the dense vegetation, the tiger forging a path with its powerful mass, the woman struggling to keep up. The forest, once a refuge, now seemed a battlefield. The air grew heavier with the smell of smoke and oil. The sound of chainsaws and cutting machines was deafening, an infernal chorus that replaced the birdsong and the whisper of the wind. After what felt like an eternity, they reached an elevation, a small rocky ridge that offered a partial view of the devastation. The woman's heart tightened. Below, where once there had been a lush green tapestry, there was now a brutal clearing, an open wound on the earth's skin. Trees lay felled, their massive trunks stripped of branches, piled like trophies of a barbaric hunt. Gigantic machines, like metal monsters, moved with ruthless efficiency, tearing at the earth, felling everything in their path. Men, small and insignificant at that distance, operated the machines, oblivious to the life they destroyed, or perhaps simply indifferent. It was the most desolate sight she had ever witnessed. Her son had not only tried to kill her, he was killing the world that had saved her. The anger in her chest transformed into a cold flame, an icy determination. She needed to stop him, but how? She was a sick, wounded woman against an empire of machines and men. The tiger let out a deep growl, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, a lament and a threat. It was furious. Its eyes gleamed with dangerous intensity, fixed on the scene below. It was the personification of nature's fury, and the woman, by its side, felt herself part of that fury. She looked at the tiger, and an idea, mad and desperate, began to form in her mind. She could not fight the machines, but perhaps she could fight the man behind them. Her son. He was the weak point, the source of all this destruction. If she could reach him, if she could expose his cruelty, perhaps there was a chance. The woman knew it was an almost impossible task. The city, her son's world, was a place she had left behind, a place of pain and betrayal. But the forest, her new home, was being destroyed. She had no choice. "We need to go," she told the tiger, her voice stronger now, laden with a new purpose. "We need to go to him." The tiger looked at her, and for a moment she thought it wouldn't understand. But then it turned, its eyes sweeping the expanse of the untouched forest, and then the devastated clearing. It seemed to ponder, to weigh the options. It was a wild animal. Its instinct was to protect its territory, to hunt, to survive. But there was something more in it, an intelligence, a connection. It moved, descending the elevation, not towards the clearing, but in a direction that seemed to bypass the destruction, deeper into the forest. It was charting a new path, a path that would lead them away from the immediate threat, but perhaps closer to the source. The woman followed, each step a prayer, each breath an act of faith. The battle for the forest had begun, and she, the abandoned mother, and the tiger, the gentle predator, were its unlikely warriors. The revenge would not be just for her, but for every falling tree, for every creature that lost its home. Dawn had brought light, but also the shadow of a war she never imagined fighting. Dawn had brought light, but also the shadow of a war she never imagined fighting. Each silent, determined step of the tiger echoed her own resolution. It did not flee, but guided, its powerful muscles moving with lethal grace through the undergrowth. The woman followed, the pain in her knees and back a constant, but now a secondary ache, muffled by the fury boiling in her chest. The forest, once a refuge of peace, had transformed into a battlefield, and she, the abandoned mother, was an unlikely warrior, wielding not a sword, but the truth and the pain of a profound betrayal. The smell of smoke and diesel intensified with the wind, bringing with it the relentless sound of machines. It was a constant reminder of the desecration, a cry of agony from the nature that enveloped her. The tiger stopped occasionally, its ears swiveling, its body tense, assessing the danger. It did not lead her to the devastated clearing, but into the depths of the forest, bypassing the destruction, seeking a path that would lead her not to escape, but to confrontation. It was a strategy, an intelligence that transcended animal instinct. It knew the enemy was not the machines, but the mind behind them. The woman felt the forest react. The birds, once so numerous, were quieter, their songs sporadic and full of alarm. Small animals scurried, frightened, feeling the vibration of the earth, the tremor of approaching violence. She felt every leaf under her feet, every branch that brushed against her skin, as if the forest itself were whispering its fears and its resistance. And she, in turn, whispered back a silent promise that she would not allow her sanctuary to be destroyed. The journey was arduous. Her feet were wounded, her clothes torn, but the thirst for justice was a fire that propelled her. She thought of her son, of the cold, calculating face he had shown when he left her to die. She thought of the greed that consumed him, the hunger for power that blinded him to humanity, to life, to his own mother. His image in his luxurious office, smiling at the devastation, was a poison that strengthened her. He had underestimated her capacity to survive, her resilience, and above all, he had underestimated the forest and its protectors. The tiger ahead was her shadow, her guide, her guardian. It moved with unwavering confidence, its amber eyes always vigilant. At one point it stopped, sniffing the air, and then looked at her, a gleam of understanding in its gaze. It seemed to say, "We're getting close." The woman nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. It was not fear, it was anticipation. Meanwhile, far away, the ruthless executive received a call. "Sir, we have a slight delay. One of the machines encountered unexpected resistance in a denser area. We had to reallocate the team." He frowned. "Unexpected. What kind of resistance? A large animal?" The assistant hesitated. "No, sir. Apparently the machine was sabotaged, cables cut, engine damaged, and we found tracks, large ones, feline." The ruthless executive laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Nonsense. A tiger? In this abandoned forest? Must be some farm animal. Increase the pace. I want this forest cleared, and I want any resistance eliminated. No traces." He hung up, giving no further thought to the matter, his mind already on other numbers and profits. In the forest, the woman felt a shiver. The sabotage. It hadn't been her. Could it have been the tiger? Or the forest itself somehow fighting back? The idea that the tiger could be so cunning, so protective, filled her with a new wave of admiration and hope. They were not alone. The forest was with them. They continued to advance, the sound of the machines growing a little more distant, but still present, like a heartbeat from hell. The tiger led her along a less dense path, climbing a steep slope that revealed a new perspective. From there, she could see not only the devastated clearing, but also, in the distance, the edge of the forest, where civilization began to insinuate itself. There was a dirt road, and beyond it, a small town she barely recognized. It was the world she had fled, her son's world. The woman stopped, gasping, but not from exhaustion. It was from the magnitude of the task that awaited her. She could not fight the machines with her bare hands, but she could fight the mind behind them. She could expose the cruelty, the greed, the inhumanity of her own son. She could use truth as her sharpest weapon. The tiger sat beside her, its eyes fixed on the landscape. It seemed to understand the crossroads they were at. The forest was its home, but the threat came from outside, from a world that respected neither wildlife nor human life. "He won't stop," she whispered, her voice laden with a grim conviction. "He won't stop until everything is destroyed." She looked at the tiger, and a new determination shone in her eyes. "But we won't stop either. We're going to the city." The tiger watched her, and then with a slow, majestic movement it stood. It did not turn towards the forest. It turned towards the city, towards civilization, towards the source of destruction. It was ready. The woman felt a lump in her throat. She was about to enter a world that had rejected her, to confront the son who had betrayed her, but she was not alone. She had the forest in her heart and the wild spirit by her side. The war had begun, and the battlefield now extended beyond the trees into the heart of humanity. The decision had been made, and with it, an invisible bridge rose between two worlds. On one side, the forest, her sanctuary in agony, where every fallen tree was a lament and every fleeing creature a cry. On the other, the city, a monster of concrete and metal, her son's lair, the epicenter of the greed that threatened to swallow everything. The tiger, with its silent majesty, did not hesitate. It did not look back at the home being torn apart, but forward into the unknown, to the enemy. It was an act of faith, a promise sealed between the wild and the human. The woman followed, each step a battle against pain and exhaustion. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, but the flame of determination in her chest was stronger than any physical weakness. The forest, once a welcoming embrace, now seemed to bid farewell, its shadows lengthening like protective arms, its leaves whispering goodbye. The scent of damp earth and wildlife gradually mingled with the pungent odor of smoke, diesel, and something else, something artificial and oppressive. The smell of civilization. They moved with the night, the stars their only visible guides. The tiger, a striped phantom in the darkness, guided her through the densest bushes, through hidden ravines, avoiding the more open paths that could lead to detection. It was the personification of caution, its amber eyes sweeping the darkness, its ears swiveling to catch the slightest sound. The woman, in turn, tried to imitate its discretion, every movement calculated, every breath held. She felt the forest becoming sparser, the trees more spaced out, the shadows less deep. The sound of the machines, once a distant roar, was now a constant hum, an infernal soundtrack that seemed to intensify with each step. It was the sound of destruction in progress, a cruel reminder of what was at stake. But strangely, amidst this noise, the woman began to notice something else. The silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence of absence. The birdsong had almost completely ceased. The nocturnal sounds of the forest, the rustling of small animals, the croaking of frogs, were muffled, replaced by an unsettling void. Life was fleeing or being silenced. With each kilometer they advanced, the landscape changed. Trees gave way to makeshift fences, discarded litter, signs of human presence that did not respect nature's boundaries. They crossed a dirt road where tire tracks were more numerous than animal prints. The tiger stopped, sniffing the air intensely, its muscles tense. It seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if the scent of humanity was a warning. But then, with a low, determined growl, it continued, drawing the woman out of the forest and into a new frontier. The woman felt her heart pound. The city. She had fled it, fled the pain, the betrayal, the superficiality. Now she was returning, not as a victim, but as a warrior. She remembered the lit streets, the incessant sounds, the anonymous crowd. It would be a challenge for her, a sick and frail woman. But for the tiger, how would a majestic predator, born for the vastness of the forest, adapt to the concrete labyrinth? Meanwhile, in the luxury of his office, the ruthless executive received another report. "Sir, operations are progressing, but the logging team encountered another incident. Several machines were disabled and there are reports of unusual tracks." The son rolled his eyes. Unusual tracks. What is this, a fairy tale? Increase security, hire more guards. I want this forest cleared by the end of the week. Don't come to me with animal stories. This is business, not a zoo. He hung up, irritated. The idea that something so insignificant could delay his plans was absurd. He was building an empire, and nothing, not even nature, would stand in his way. In the darkness of the night, the woman felt a shiver. He wouldn't stop. His cruelty was an unstoppable force, but she wouldn't stop either. The tiger ahead of her was living proof that nature had its own weapons, its own intelligence. They were not alone. The forest, even wounded, was with them. They advanced, now more cautious than ever. The faint light of distant streetlights began to pierce the darkness, revealing the first outlines of human constructions. The air grew colder, denser. The sound of cars, once a distant murmur, grew into a constant roar. The woman felt a wave of nausea. It was the world that had rejected her, the world her son had embraced with such fervor. The tiger stopped, its eyes fixed on a barbed wire fence marking the boundary of a property. Beyond it, a wasteland stretched out, dotted with debris and tall weeds, but already with the first lights of houses turning on in the distance. It looked at the woman, and in its gaze she saw not just fierce intelligence, but also a silent question. "Are we ready for this?" The woman took a deep breath, the cold, polluted air scratching her throat. She was sick, wounded, but the sight of the city, the promise of confronting her son, was a bitter elixir that propelled her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice hoarse but firm. "We are ready." She knew that the battle for the forest had transformed into a war for her son's soul, and perhaps for humanity's soul. Entering the city was not just a geographical step, but a dive into the heart of darkness. where truth would be her only light and the tiger her only shield. The battlefield was now the asphalt, and the weapons, courage and truth. The city air was a cold, dirty slap, a brutal contrast to the damp, fragrant breath of the forest. The battlefield was now the asphalt, and the weapons, courage and truth. The woman, short of breath and trembling, watched the tiger. Its amber eyes, once so at ease in the forest gloom, now reflected the distant, strange artificial lights of street lamps. The barbed wire fence was an insignificant barrier to the tiger's strength, but a powerful symbol of the boundary they were crossing. With an agile, silent movement that belied its size, the feline passed through the fence. It did not tear it, did not knock it down. It squeezed under a higher section, like a contorting shadow, and waited. The woman, in turn, felt the familiar pang of pain as she bent, but adrenaline suppressed the scream. She crawled, tearing her clothes and skin on one of the wires, a small sacrifice for the war that was announcing itself. The tiger waited for her on the other side, its eyes fixed on her, a wild patience that calmed her. They were in a wasteland, a purgatory of garbage and tall weeds that served as a transition between dying nature and pulsating concrete. The smell was a cacophony of odors: decaying trash, exhaust fumes, chemical scents, and the sweet, nauseating perfume of sewage. For the tiger, each smell must have been an assault on its keen senses, a dissonant symphony, replacing the clean aromas of earth and leaves. Nevertheless, it moved with unwavering determination, its steps long and silent, as if the asphalt beneath its paws was just another type of ground. The woman followed, her eyes sweeping the horizon. The city stretched ahead, a patchwork of lights and shadows, a sleeping monster that would soon awaken. She could see the silhouettes of buildings, towers that scratched the night sky, and hear the constant murmur of traffic, a sound that never ceased. It was her son's world, a world built on exploitation and indifference. They kept to the shadows, using dry bushes and piles of debris as cover. The tiger was a master of camouflage, even in such an alien environment. Its stripes, once perfect for the forest, now helped it blend with the irregular shadows cast by the city lights. The woman, less adapted, felt exposed, every movement a risk, every breath an echo. Meanwhile, atop one of those skyscrapers, the ruthless executive was in a night meeting, the city lights twinkling below him like a carpet of jewels. Last quarter's profits exceeded expectations, one of his directors said with a fawning smile. The acquisition of that forest area was a masterstroke, sir. The value of the timber and the land for future developments is incalculable. The son nodded, a cold gleam in his eyes. Incalculable is the right word. I will not tolerate delays. Any resistance, whatever it may be, must be crushed. We have a schedule to meet. He didn't even think about the unusual tracks or the sabotaged machines. They were mere noises on the path to fortune. On the street below, the woman felt a shiver that did not come from the cold. It was her son's presence, the force of his greed that seemed to permeate the very air of the city. She knew he wouldn't stop. He had no heart, only an insatiable appetite for power and money. But she wouldn't stop either. The forest had given her new life, a new purpose, and the tiger was the personification of that resistance. They advanced deeper into the urban labyrinth. The tiger, with its instinctive intelligence, seemed to understand the need for extreme caution. It avoided busy streets, preferring dark alleys, abandoned vacant lots, and the perimeters of public parks, where nature still tried to breathe amidst the concrete. The woman, exhausted, felt that every step was a miracle. Her illness was there, a constant weight, but fury and determination were a fire that kept her moving. They needed a plan. The woman knew she couldn't simply appear at her son's door. She needed allies, proof, a voice that could be heard above the city's noise and her son's influence. She thought of journalists, environmental organizations, those who still cared about truth and justice. But how to find them? how to reach them, a sick woman and a wild tiger in the heart of the city. The tiger suddenly stopped, its muscles tense, its body lowered. It sniffed the air and a low, guttural growl escaped its throat. The woman followed its gaze and saw. A group of young people, with glowing cell phones, approached an alley, laughing and talking loudly. They were just a few meters away, about to turn the corner where the tiger and the woman were hidden. The woman's heart pounded. An encounter with humans now would be disastrous. Panic on one side, the tiger's fury on the other. But the tiger, instead of attacking or fleeing wildly, did something unexpected. It lay down, flattening itself against the ground, and with a quick, almost imperceptible movement, pushed the woman behind a dumpster, covering her with its own massive body. It hid her, using itself as a shield, its warm, heavy breath on her face. The young people passed, oblivious to their presence. Their voices and laughter faded, and the tense silence returned. The tiger waited a moment, and then, slowly, stood up. It looked at the woman, and in its gaze she saw the same silent question as before, but now with a new layer of urgency. "Are we ready for this?" The air still vibrated with the echo of fading laughter, and the woman felt her heart pound against her ribs, a drum of panic and relief. The tiger, its massive body still protecting her, exuded a comforting warmth, but also a palpable tension. It had acted by instinct, yes, but also with an intelligence that transcended the animal. It had hidden her, prioritizing discretion over aggression, survival over confrontation. It was a lesson the city imposed. Invisibility was their only armor. Slowly, the tiger rose, its amber eyes sweeping the dark alley. There was no immediate danger, but the fragility of their position was undeniable. They were intruders, anomalies in a world that did not want them. The woman stood with difficulty, every muscle protesting, the pain in her side a constant reminder of her own mortality. She looked at the tiger, and in its gaze she saw the same silent question as before, but now with a new layer of urgency. "Are we ready for this?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice hoarse but firm. "We are ready." But readiness did not mean ease. The first battle would be to find a safe place, a temporary refuge, before the city swallowed them. They moved again, shadows among shadows. The tiger, with its instinctive intelligence, seemed to understand the need for extreme caution. It avoided busy streets, preferring dark alleys, abandoned vacant lots, and the perimeters of public parks, where nature still tried to breathe amidst the concrete. Every step was an act of faith, every shadow a potential hiding place. The city's scent was a continuous assault on its senses, decaying trash, exhaust fumes, chemical odors, and the sweet, nauseating perfume of sewage. For the tiger, each scent must have been a dissonant symphony, a constant noise replacing the clean aromas of earth and leaves. Nevertheless, it moved with unwavering determination, its steps long and silent, as if the asphalt beneath its paws was just another type of ground. The woman, exhausted, felt that every step was a miracle. Her illness was there, a constant weight, but fury and determination were a fire that kept her moving. She watched the tiger, the way it adapted, how its stripes, once perfect for the forest, now helped it blend with the irregular shadows cast by the city lights. It was her strength, her guide, her last hope. They delved deeper into the urban labyrinth, passing abandoned buildings, broken windows that looked like empty eyes staring into the darkness. The silence of these places was almost as oppressive as the noise of the main streets. Finally, the tiger stopped before an old warehouse, its brick walls faded and graffitied, its roof partially collapsed. It was a skeleton of concrete and metal, a place forgotten by the city, but perfect for them. With a careful movement, the tiger pushed open a rusty metal door that creaked in protest. The interior was dark and dusty, filled with rubble and the smells of mold and metal, but it was a shelter, It was a place where the city lights couldn't reach them, where the sound of traffic was just a distant murmur. The woman felt a momentary relief, a truce in the constant war. She collapsed onto a pile of old sacks, exhaustion finally catching up to her. In the silence of the warehouse, the woman began to think. They needed a plan. She couldn't simply appear at her son's door. She needed allies, proof, a voice that could be heard above the city's noise and her son's influence. She thought of journalists, environmental organizations, those who still cared about truth and justice, but how to find them, how to reach them. A sick woman and a wild tiger in the heart of the city. Her eyes swept the warehouse and stopped on a pile of old newspapers, yellowed by time. An idea, fragile as a dry leaf, began to form in her mind. Newspapers were the voice of the city, the medium through which news traveled. If she could find a newspaper that still had courage, a report that cared about the truth. But how? The tiger lay down beside her, its body warm and solid. A safe harbor in the midst of the urban storm. It watched her, its eyes reflecting the faint light filtering through the cracks. The woman felt the strength emanating from it, the unwavering loyalty. They were not alone. The forest, even wounded, was with them, personified in that magnificent feline. The battle for the forest had transformed into a war for her son's soul, and perhaps for humanity's soul. Entering the city was not just a geographical step, but a dive into the heart of darkness, where truth would be her only light, and the tiger her only shield. The battlefield was now the asphalt, and the weapons, courage, and truth. And the first battle would be to find a safe place, a temporary refuge, before the city swallowed them, and then to find a voice. The silence of the warehouse was a fragile truce, a breath of calm before the next storm. The woman, exhausted, felt the cold of the brick walls on her back, but the tiger's warmth, lying beside her, was a balm. Her eyes, heavy and burning, swept over the pile of old newspapers, each yellowed sheet a fragment of a world she had abandoned, a world she now desperately needed to invade. She knew the city was a labyrinth of concrete and steel, but also a complex network of information, of voices, and she needed one. Her mind, despite the fever and pain, worked tirelessly. She needed allies, proof, a voice that could be heard above the city's noise and her son's influence. With trembling fingers, she picked up one of the newspapers, the rough, dry paper brushing against her skin. Headlines screamed about forgotten scandals, about dirty politics, and the relentless march of progress. But she wasn't looking for that. She sought a spark, a sign that truth still mattered to someone. Her eyes danced over the columns of text, searching for words like environmental justice, corruption, and denunciation. Time was an enemy as relentless as her son. The tiger, sensing the tension in her body, let out a low purr, a sound that vibrated in its chest and resonated in the darkness of the warehouse. It was a reminder of its presence, of its unwavering loyalty. It was the forest personified, wild resistance against human greed. And then a small, faded photograph caught her attention. A woman with a serious face and piercing eyes held a sign at a protest. The article, though old, spoke of the destruction of a green area for a real estate development. The name, Helena Vaz, investigative journalist, known for her intransigence against speculation and greed. A spark, a chance. But how to reach Helena Vaz? How to convince someone to listen to the story of a sick woman and a wild tiger? The mere idea seemed insane. A feverish delusion. The city was a monster of 1,000 eyes and ears, and they were just two fleeing shadows. The tiger, as if sensing the wave of despair that engulfed her, nudged its head against her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that calmed her racing heart. Far away, atop his glass tower, the sun did not think of journalists or any kind of resistance. He was immersed in charts and projections. The forest map on his screen, now a diminishing green patch, replaced by squares and rectangles of future buildings. His mother was a distant memory, an inconvenience overcome. The unusual tracks had been attributed to escaped farm animals, the sabotaged machines, to acts of vandalism by eco-terrorists who would soon be identified and punished. He had reinforced security around the forest perimeter and also at his city properties, not out of fear, but out of an obsession with control. The woman felt the weight of her son's indifference, an invisible burden the entire city seemed to carry. But the mention of Helena Vaz, even in an old newspaper, had planted a seed of hope. She needed a phone, an address, anything that would lead her to this woman. The warehouse offered shelter, but no solutions. The tiger stood, stretching its muscular body with feline grace. It sniffed the air, its whiskers twitching, catching odors the woman couldn't detect. There was something in the air, a subtle change, perhaps the scent of imminent rain, or of a new threat approaching. It walked to one of the cracks in the wall, looking out at the dark street, its amber eyes reflecting the faint light that filtered through. Its senses were its eyes and ears, sharper than hers, a living alert system. "We need to get out of here, my friend," she whispered, her voice stronger now, driven by a new objective. "We need to find Helena Vaz, but we can't just show up. We need a message, something she can't ignore." She looked at the tiger and then at the pile of newspapers. A bold, almost crazy idea began to form in her mind. She needed something that proved the truth of her story, something that undeniably linked her son to the forest's destruction. The unusual tracks and sabotaged machines were evidence, but who would believe a sick woman and a wild tiger? She needed something more direct, more visual, something that spoke for itself. The tiger, with its sharp claws, had cut the ropes that bound her to the tree. Its claws could be used for more than liberation. They could leave a mark, an unmistakable signature. The illness gnawed at her, but the urgency of her mission was a temporary antidote. With each passing second, her son destroyed more of the forest, more of what remained of his own heart. The battle was not just to save the forest, but to expose the darkness that had consumed her son. And the tiger, its silent guardian, was the personification of wild hope in a civilized and corrupted world. The warehouse, once a refuge, now felt like a prison. The woman knew they couldn't stay there much longer. The city was waking up, and with it the dangers. They needed to act. Truth was her only weapon, and the tiger her strongest shield. The next phase of the war began with a search for a voice that would echo the truth amidst the roar of greed. Her mind, despite the fever and pain, worked tirelessly. She needed allies, proof, a voice that could be heard above the city's noise and her son's influence. With trembling fingers, she picked up one of the newspapers, the rough, dry paper brushing against her skin. Headlines screamed about forgotten scandals, about dirty politics, and the relentless march of progress. But she wasn't looking for that. She sought a spark, a sign that truth still mattered to someone. Her eyes danced over the columns of text, searching for words like environmental justice, corruption, denunciation. Time was an enemy as relentless as her son. A spark, a chance. But how to reach Helena Vaz? How to convince someone to listen to the story of a sick woman and a wild tiger? The mere idea seemed insane, a feverish delusion. The city was a monster of 1,000 eyes and ears, and they were just two fleeing shadows. The tiger, as if sensing the wave of despair that engulfed her, nudged its head against her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that calmed her racing heart. The tiger, with its sharp claws, had cut the ropes that bound her to the tree. Its claws could be used for more than liberation. They could leave a mark, an unmistakable signature. The illness gnawed at her, but the urgency of her mission was a temporary antidote. With each passing second, her son destroyed more of the forest, more of what remained of his own heart. The battle was not just to save the forest, but to expose the darkness that had consumed her son, and the tiger, its silent guardian, was the personification of wild hope in a civilized and corrupted world. The woman carefully tore out the newspaper page with Helena Vaz's article. The address of the journalist's old office was there, though perhaps outdated. It didn't matter. It was a starting point. "Let's go, my friend," she murmured, and the tiger followed her out of the warehouse, gliding like a shadow in the pre-dawn darkness. The city was a labyrinth of concrete and steel. They moved through narrow streets and alleys, the tiger a majestic and silent presence, the woman fragile, but propelled by an unwavering force. The smell of garbage, smoke, and asphalt was a stark contrast to the damp, earthy aroma of the forest. But the tiger did not seem disturbed. Its keen senses guided it, avoiding unwanted encounters. Their target was one of her son's newest ventures, a skyscraper under construction with a huge advertising banner displaying the image of an untouched forest, ironically, the very one he was destroying. As they approached, the woman felt the oppressive presence of her son's wealth and power, like a cold mist. "It's here," she whispered to the tiger, pointing to the banner. "We need to leave our mark, one that cannot be ignored." The tiger looked at her, its amber eyes understanding. With an agile, silent leap, it reached the base of the banner, its sharp claws tearing the resistant fabric, forming an unmistakable pattern. It was not a message in words, but a declaration of nature's fury and resistance. The deep marks were like scars on the image of the false forest, a warning. The mission was accomplished. Now, the next step, Helena Vaz. They moved again, this time towards the city center, where the journalist's old office was located. The woman felt her fever rising, but adrenaline kept her on her feet. When they finally reached the building, the dawn light was beginning to tint the sky. The office was closed, of course, but the woman couldn't wait. She picked up a stone and, with what little strength she had left, knocked on the glass door repeatedly until a sleepy security guard appeared. "What do you want?" he growled, annoyed. His eyes widened when he saw the tiger standing silently beside the woman, its eyes fixed on him. "Helena Vaz," the woman said, her voice hoarse but firm. "I need to speak with her. It's urgent. About the forest, about her son." The security guard, stunned and terrified, didn't know what to do. He called the police, but before they could arrive, Helena Vaz, who happened to be working late, heard the commotion. She came down the stairs, her expression of annoyance transforming into shock when she saw the scene. A sick woman on the verge of collapse and a majestic tiger, both emanating an aura of despair and determination. Helena Vaz, the journalist who feared no one, felt a shiver. She saw the truth in the woman's eyes, the story that needed to be told. She saw the tiger, not as a threat, but as a guardian, a symbol. She didn't know how, but she knew this was the story of her life. "Come in," Helena said, her voice surprisingly calm. Ignoring the guard and the impending chaos, "Tell me everything." The woman, with the last vestiges of strength, began to speak, her voice choked with emotion and illness. She told about the forest, about her son's greed, about the cruelty, about the moment the tiger saved her. Helena Vaz listened, recording every word, her eyes fixed on the woman and the tiger, which lay down at its protector's feet, as if understanding the importance of that moment. The journalist knew she held not just a report, but an exposé that would shake the city, that would reveal the rot behind the glitter of progress. She had the story, the witness, and the most unusual proof of all, a wild tiger in the heart of civilization, an emissary of the wounded forest. The news exploded. The claw marks on the son's banner, the photos of the woman and the tiger, Helena Vaz's testimony. The city, once blinded by greed, was forced to see the truth. The Sun's empire began to crumble under the weight of public outrage and investigations. The woman, exhausted but with her soul at peace, saw justice done. She had fulfilled her mission. The tiger, her faithful guardian, remained by her side until the end. When illness finally took her, she was in a safe place, surrounded by those who helped her tell her story. The tiger, after a time, was carefully taken back to a natural reserve, a place where it could live in peace, far from the concrete and noise of the city. It had fulfilled its promise, protecting the woman who had become its family and helping her save the forest. The forest, though wounded, began to heal, and the story of the woman and the tiger became a legend, a reminder that nature, even when brutally attacked, always finds a way to fight, to resist, to whisper the truth through its silent guardians. The Sun, stripped of his power and fortune, was forced to confront the darkness of his own soul, a darkness his mother, even in her last days, had tried to illuminate with the truth and the courage of a tiger. The battle for the forest had ended, but the memory of their struggle would echo forever, a silent roar in the city's soul.